1 2. Mic check 1 2. Yeah, I think we're back. Hello and welcome to another episode of Son of a Preacher Man. As always, I am your host, the Soapman himself, in the flesh, baby. And as always, if you are new to this channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. Now, the Soapman indeed has a very special episode for you this fine evening. I'm going to reveal my biggest and greatest discovery to this day. Now, when I first started my research on all things biblical, I made a number of remarkable discoveries, to let me tell it. They were remarkable in my book, at least. But when I used to come back and tell my father to see what he thought, he would always say to me, "Son, you just don't understand. You will never understand the things of God. You're too full of sin and unrighteousness. You're too full of unholiness. Now take me for example. I talked to the Lord while we just had breakfast the other day at Cracker Barrel. So, as you see, it was utterly futile trying to get my old man's support on my theories and ideas. But I knew that I was on to something. The Soapman knew, he always knew. And so I just kept pressing forward. And it motivated me. The doubt of others motivated the Soapman to get to the bottom of these things that has plagued society and the human race for an eternity. So, eat your heart out, Pops. Because today I'm going to reveal the identity of the biblical Moses. And this has never been done before, though it has been attempted many times. People have been trying to discover the biblical Moses' true identity since before I was born. They've said over the years that, oh, well, this guy's the real Moses or that guy's the real Moses. But they've never been able to definitively prove who the real historical Moses was, who the biblical Moses was in history. It is unknown. No one else on the planet knows this information but me. And in I'm not gonna lie, in over an hour, because this is gonna take longer than an hour. I'll try to make it as quick as possible, but in about over an hour, you too will know definitively, without a shadow of a doubt, who the biblical Moses is. I would usually tell you to research what I say or Google it or YouTube it, but Google doesn't know. YouTube doesn't know. The preacher man doesn't know. Go ask him. He'll be like, huh? What? Moses, the real Moses in history. They don't know. Only I do. I'm the only person on the planet who knows. But Soapman is going to share it with you, my subscribers, my viewers, my supporters. Hey, before we get started, one love, I gotta give shout outs to everybody who supported me. This is like my season finale video, and so I want to make sure I do this right. Shouts out to my girl, Cindy Robinson, who donated to the cause today. Looking out, been supporting me from day one. Me and Ching go back way back. Ching, you know what's up to the days in Glen Park on 49th, baby. Yo, Ching has been holding me down. She comments, she gives me feedback. I really appreciate that. Now, if you haven't noticed, I got the Soapman backdrop. That's courtesy of Nikki Smalls. One love, Nikki Smalls. Shout outs to Nikki Smalls for providing a backdrop. Hands on, man, helping to call soldiers, putting their feet on the ground. If you haven't noticed by now, I have the official Soapman t-shirt on today. Because I'm so for real, I'm juiced up like a Power Ranger for this episode. And look at this, if that wasn't enough, Payal, I got the official Soapman wristband. Look at that thing gleaming, boy. It's almost glittering, clinking. So, anyway, before we get started today, a couple more shouts out. I got to give a shout out to my man B Wise, been holding it down and supporting me and encouraging me from the very beginning. Also, Jess, what up, Jess? Much love. Jess been holding me down also and supporting me and encouraging me and telling me, most importantly, keep the videos an hour long. No doubt. Much love, Jess. Got to give shouts out to my mom, meticulously poring over each video so she can harass me about the mistakes that I made. Speaking of mistakes, it's a perfect segue. Before we get started, we have to go back, or I have to go back and correct some mistakes that I made on my last video. So, if you will, indulge your boy, okay? If you haven't noticed, I got a couple new things. It's a new program. My old computer went kaput. So, I had to get this new program. We're gonna see how it works out. In my last video, Moses Part 1, the Egyptian, on this slide, I kept saying the death of the first unborn. I was talking about one of the plagues that Moses was going to bring upon the Egyptian people. Well, one of the plagues that God was going to bring upon the Egyptian people through Moses. It was actually the last plague. It was the death of the firstborn. I kept saying death of the first unborn for some reason. Like, I don't know, my brain was on pilot or screensaver or something like that. I'm not sure, but I meant to say death of the firstborn, death of the firstborn. Okay, so going back, I don't have to go back far. This slide, last video, I said that Moses came to Pharaoh and threatened Pharaoh that God would bring plagues upon the Israelites. I actually said that. It was a complete slip of the tongue. I apologize. It's no excuses. I obviously meant to say Moses came to Pharaoh and threatened that God would bring plagues upon the Egyptian nation, the Egyptian people, not the Israelite nation, not the Israelites. It was a pure slip of the tongue. I apologize, but I got to let you know, making these videos, a lot goes into it, and it's hard to keep up with all these dates and stories, especially when, you know, you're not writing them down, and I'm not writing any of this down. I'm doing this all from memory, all from thought, but no excuses, but to apologize and make up for my mistakes. So I solemnly apologize for these mistakes and having to take time to, you know, go through all this stuff. Okay, so going back even further, let me see if I can find it. Okay, yeah, going all the way back to the beginning. I talked about the admonitions of Ippawar, and what the admonitions of Ippawar are, or is, it's an ancient scroll sitting somewhere in a British museum or a university somewhere on planet Earth. But it's an ancient Egyptian scroll or papyrus. And on this ancient Egyptian scroll is the prophecy of Ippawar. And Ippawar he was either a sage or a scribe, someone who had the ear of the Pharaoh. And the admonitions of Ippawar, it dates back to the end of the Middle Kingdom, beginning of the Second Intermediate Period, somewhere around that time. And it's really funny and eerie because this prophecy, even though experts disregard this as poetry or just entertainment, this prophecy is eerily similar to the story Flavius Josephus gives in the Antiquities of the Jews when he talks about a certain reliable and powerful scribe of Pharaoh who predicts the coming of one of the Hebrew children who, if reared and brought up, will rise up and bring the dominion of the Egyptian people low and raise the Israelites up upon high. And Flavius Josephus speaks of this reliable sage or scribe of the Pharaoh. And he says he's sagacious in what he does. He's good at what he does. He's trusted. And Pharaoh trusts him and he trusts his word. And I can't help but wonder, we don't have this text in its entirety because this document is so old and worn, and there's, part of it is missing, and, some of the writings on it, it's worn away. This could very well be the document and the writings of the scribe that Flavius Josephus talked about. For all we know, in the parts that are missing, it could mention this coming of a Hebrew child, like Flavius Josephus said in his story. Anyways, the whole point is, in this document, the admonitions of Ippawar gives this doom and gloom scenario that will befall the Egyptians. And he gives some detail as to what this doom and gloom scenario is all about. And he talks about these storms that will hit the Egyptian land. And he goes into detail. He says that the water of the Nile will turn into blood. And I just thought that was eerily similar to one of the 10 plagues that Moses brought upon the Egyptians. It was actually the first plague, water turned into blood. There were a number of other plagues that happened. Flipping through this because I'm still trying to figure out how to work this program. Okay, here we go. So one of the plagues, Moses turns water into blood. The water of the Nile River turns into blood. If you see my arrow in the middle of the screen, right here in the top hand corner. But I left out in the last video that in the admonitions of Ippawar, he also talks about an intense and unique darkness that will befall upon the Egyptian people. And my whole point in bringing this up and going back and emphasizing this is that this document is eerily similar in several ways. He talks about water turning into blood. That's one. He talks about an intense and unique darkness of the like that has never come upon the land of Egypt before. And he talks about these various storms. And this is eerily similar to the plagues described in the Bible brought about by Moses. Now, I think I've covered all the mistakes that I made in the last video. I hope so, and hopefully there won't be many more. But really quickly, I just want to do a quick recap for those of you who may not have seen the last video. It's important that you understand and get caught up to this point. Now, we've been talking about Egypt a lot in the last few videos, and it's really all a setup to this video here. Going back to the Middle Kingdom, the 12th dynasty, we talked about Joseph, and we actually found evidence of Joseph existing during the time of very successful Pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, Middle Kingdom, Senusret III. So, Middle Kingdom, Senusret III, we got evidence of Joseph living during his time. The Bible says, after the death of Joseph, that the kingship came into a new house that knew not Joseph. So this new royal house, they either didn't remember Joseph or didn't respect Joseph. It's been a long time since Joseph made his great contribution to the land of Egypt, and they either don't remember him or don't respect him or just don't care about his past or prior contributions. And so the Bible says that they noticed that the Hebrews, which I believe are the Hyksos, were multiplying out of control. They were overpopulated. They were successful. God was blessing them and everything they did, and that worried this new royal house. Flavius Josephus says that the new royal house was weak. He says that they were lazy, and he also says that the Egyptian people under this new royal house, he says that they were lazy and envious of the Hebrews, envious of the hard-working Hebrews who they were literally watching multiply be right in front of their eyes. They were literally watching them become wealthy and successful and abundant. Just like the Bible says that they were, just like the Bible says that God blessed them, Flavius Josephus echoes this. Now, I believe that this new dynasty that Flavius Josephus and the Bible talks about, because they do not specify which royal house it is, but I believe it is the 13th dynasty, and they ruled right around here. If you can see my arrow in the middle of the screen, The 13th dynasty ruled right around this Memphis area, and I believe this 13th dynasty to be this weak dynasty that Flavius Josephus talked about, and I also believe the 13th dynasty to be the dynasty that the Bible spoke of that didn't respect or remember the contributions of Joseph. So what's going to happen is this 13th dynasty is going to take over around 1805 BCE. And even experts and archaeologists and Egyptologists, they all agree, and they don't agree on much, but they all agree that this 13th dynasty was weak, a weak dynasty that could not hold the land of Egypt together. They could not keep Lower Egypt unified with Upper Egypt. And so this 13th dynasty, they take over about 1805 BC, but about 1780 BC, they're already having a problem with the overpopulation of the Hyksos around Avaris. By 1780 BC, they're having a problem with the overpopulation of the Hyksos at Avaris. By 1750 BCE, they've dealt with this problem by instituting a law of slavery. They have enslaved the Hyksos people, and this law has spread all across the land of Egypt, because all across the land of Egypt, these people are growing and multiplying at a rapid rate. And not only that, they're becoming wealthy and powerful, and that's frightening the Egyptians. So about 1750 BC, they enslaved these people. By about 1700 BC, this weak government can no longer keep the land of Egypt unified. By 1700 BCE, the central government of Egypt completely evaporates and breaks down. Here at Avaris, they can't contain this rapid growth and the rapid increase of these people here at Avaris. These Hyksos people at Avaris, by 1700 BC, they've grown and multiplied and become powerful enough to form a rival 14th dynasty to compete with the 13th dynasty. Unbelievable. And this 14th dynasty, they exert their influence and dominance all over the Nile Delta, and they compete with this 13th dynasty. By 1650 BCE, and I actually believe this occurred as far back as 1690 or maybe a little later, 1675 BCE. But a 15th dynasty is going to spawn from this 14th dynasty. It's going to be hatched. It's going to branch out from the 14th dynasty. And this 15th dynasty is much more aggressive. They are much more emboldened. This 14th dynasty was really like a dynasty in its infancy, and it's trying to get itself together. But this 15th dynasty that comes out of the 14th dynasty, it is well lubed and oiled. It is ready to go. It's gonna swallow up, it's gonna gobble up this 14th dynasty. It incorporates this 14th dynasty into itself. And this 15th dynasty takes over the Nile Delta. And they don't just stop there. They marched their way down south, eating up and gobbling up everything in sight like an amoeba, like a black hole. And when they run into this 13th dynasty, they utterly annihilate them, obliterate them, crush them, stamp them out into nothing. And they don't stop there. They keep marching their way down past Heracleopolis. They take Heracleopolis and keep marching their way down south. Eventually, while all this is happening, a 16th dynasty pops up at Thebes, and they control this Abydos area. This is an ancient area where the very first pharaohs of Egypt ruled from this Abydos area. So this 16th dynasty from Thebes, who really they're just a puppet dynasty. They're puppet pharaohs of the 15th dynasty. At least that's what at least that's what experts and Egyptologists believe. This 15th dynasty, they're going to This 15th dynasty is going to occupy and dominate all of Lower Egypt and some of Middle Egypt. And they're going to halt and trade peacefully with this 16th dynasty for a while. And then a 17th dynasty also emerges at Thebes. And this 17th dynasty is ruled by a pharaoh, an Egyptian pharaoh, named Seqenen-Re-Tau. And Seqenen-Re-Tau has two sons, Kamose and Amose. And we're going to talk a lot about them today. But what I want to stress is mainly this weak 13th dynasty that I believe Flavius Josephus and the Bible speak of. And they ruled around Memphis, and they started ruling around 1805 BCE. And by about 1780 BCE, they're having a problem with with the overpopulation of these Hyksos people here and around Avaris. By 1750 BC, all over Egypt, the Hyksos people are enslaved. By 1700 BCE, the central government and governance of Egypt has completely evaporated and broken down, giving rise to a 14th dynasty here at Avaris. Around 1650 BCE for sure, I believe as early as 1690 BC. But definitely most experts agree that by 1650 BC, a 15th dynasty is going to emerge, is going to hatch and spawn from this 14th dynasty. It's going to gobble it up, take over the Nile Delta, crush this 13th dynasty, march its way down south, totally dominating all of Lower Egypt and most of Middle Egypt. It's going to share power with this emerging 16th and 17th dynasty. And that's where we're going to begin our story today. Without further ado, finally, shut Troy up and get started. One last slide before we get started. So what we're going to talk about today is how this 15th dynasty, they're at peace with this 16th and 17th dynasty. But something's going to reactivate this 15th dynasty, and they're going to start this march again down south. In the process, they're going to crush this 16th dynasty, just like they did the 13th dynasty, just like they swallowed up the 14th dynasty. This 15th dynasty, this super aggressive, super emboldened, super powerful dynasty of foreign Semitic Hyksos Hebrew rulers are going to be reinvigorated, reactivated, and they're going to start marching their way down south once again, crushing this 16th dynasty. And it's going to set up this showdown between this aggressive, emboldened 15th dynasty of foreign Semitic Hebrew rulers, foreign Semitic Hebrew pharaohs. These Semitic Hebrew rulers are calling themselves pharaohs. They formed a rival dynasty. This is the second intermediate period. It is civil war. There are multiple dynasties and multiple pharaohs ruling at one time. And I've just wanted to set up the scenario for today's video where we have this aggressive 15th dynasty coming from Lower Egypt, and they've crushed all in their path. They've crushed this 13th dynasty. They've swallowed up this 14th dynasty. They've now crushed this 16th dynasty. And now it's this showdown between this 15th dynasty and this 17th dynasty, headquartered at their capital in Thebes, ruled by Seqenen-Re-Tau, Egyptian pharaoh of Upper Egypt. Now, before we get started, I just want to give one last shout out to my cousin Vendero Jenkins down there in Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama. Vinny, what's up, baby? My cousin Vendero thinks that I take too long to get to the point, okay? So, this shout out's for you, Vinny, okay? I am going to invoke, right now I'm going to invoke a 60-second moment of silence in honor of my cousin Vinny, who says that I take too long to get to the point. So, everybody be quiet, starting now. 60-second moment of silence. Here we go. Yo, I'm just playing Vinny. Vinny, I'm joking, man. Look, my cousin Vinny right now, when I just said that, I could see the look on your face, Vinny. You was at home. You was like, this nigga. Let me tell you about this nigga here. These niggas here, boy, I tell you. Y'all, that is exactly what my cousin Vinny was doing when I just tried to pull that stunt. Vinny, man, I'm just playing with you, man. I told you it was gonna be worth it, baby. I told you it was gonna be worth it, and here it is. Here we go. But let's get some more appropriate music, you know what I mean, for this episode. You know what I mean? I got some. Let me get my production going. Let me get my production working correctly because I got this all set up. I got it all set up, okay? For today's very special episode. Very special episode indeed. Very special episode indeed. And we are finally here. Are you ready? Well, lace up your boots. Put your hard hat on and hold your head. Here we go, y'all. If you didn't know what time it was, Soapman gonna help you out. This what time it is. Close your mouth to all them haters out there. So, we've been talking about Egypt a lot, and one of the big questions I want to answer at the beginning of this lesson is how the Hyksos were able to take over a people who were the most, or if not the most, one of the most advanced civilizations on earth at that time. The Egyptians were at the forefront of everything: religion, technology, agriculture, warfare. I mean, they were pretty much the cream of the crop during ancient times. So how were these Semitic Hyksos able to dominate them and practically leave them at the point of virtual extinction? You know, the Egyptians thought the Hyksos, who I believe to be the Hebrews, they thought they were illiterate. They had no respect for the Hyksos. The Egyptian people looked at the Hebrew people as a lower class citizen. I mean, for God's sakes, the Hyksos were shepherds. Anyone could be a shepherd. All you had to do was watch some damn sheep. But the Egyptians looked on all foreigners this way. If you look at their writings, if you look at their iconography, if you look at their hieroglyphs, they depict foreigners, whether they be Semitic Hyksos, Semitic Bedouins, Semitic Amorites, or black African Nubians. They depict them in their art as being ugly, and they also depict them as being trampled under Egyptian feet. The Egyptians did not feel that foreigners were worthy of walking on the same soil. They didn't feel that they were worthy of sitting at the same table. They looked down upon all foreigners, and the Hyksos were no exception. I disagree with experts and ancient historians and ancient Egyptians that the Hyksos people were illiterate. They may not have spoken Egyptian. They may not have written Egyptian. They may have been illiterate when it came to Egyptian writing and Egyptian reading. But there's evidence of the Hyksos people creating their own alphabet during the time of Joseph. And this would have been during the Middle Kingdom. And as smart as Joseph was, I'm pretty sure he had a lot to do with that. But experts and Egyptologists and archaeologists, they agree that this may very well be the oldest form of an alphabet anywhere. And it was found in mines in the Sinai desert. And we know during the time of Joseph that Hebrews worked in those mines. And also after the time of Joseph, they were slaves in those mines. And so here we have this ancient alphabet, or an ancient formation of an alphabet in its infancy. And it may very well be proven soon that the Hebrew or the Hyksos were, they maybe invented or maybe established the oldest alphabet, in which probably the modern alphabet is based upon. Anyway, not to go off on a tangent, how were these Hyksos able to take over Egypt and defeat the Egyptians? How were they able to do this? Was it sheer numbers? The Bible and Flavius Josephus talk about how the Hebrew people multiplied, how their numbers became overwhelming, how they overpopulated the land of Egypt. So was this how they were able to eventually dominate and take over Egypt? Was it sheer numbers? Well, this is a weapons cache excavated from around the city of Avris, around that area. And this is one of the few resources that we have on the intermediate periods is what we excavate. Another one of the sources we have on particularly the second intermediate period is Manetho, the Egyptian historian. But you have to take what Manetho says with a grain of salt, because one thing I noticed, you'll never hear Egyptians admitting defeat. You'll never look at one of the Egyptian pharaohs, Stela, and them talk about how they got their ass whooped. You'll never see in Egyptian hieroglyphs them getting beat up, because they only report great, glorious victories. They only give great, grandiloquent speeches and stories about how they were triumphant and how they pleased the gods and how they defeated their enemies. No one ever wants to talk about how they got their ass whooped. So Manetho, you take what he says with a grain of salt, okay? The last real resource that we have on the second intermediate period are the writings of the scribes of the Ramses dynasty. And Pharaoh Ramses reigned in about 1250 BCE, and his scribes and sages, they wrote about this time period, the second intermediate period. And they wrote about these foreign Hyksos rulers. So those are the three resources that we have on the second intermediate period. So we dug up, well, not me personally, but Egyptologists and archaeologists dug up this weapons cache at or around Avris, and these are some of the weapons that the Hyksos people would have used in their wars against the Egyptians. And these are short swords, spearheads, daggers, and look how well they are made, even after all these thousands of years. If you can see my arrow in the middle of the screen, look at the handle, look at the craftsmanship and design on the handle of this dagger. It's still shiny and polished. I'm not sure what kind of material that is, ivory, lapis lazuli, but my God, this is state of the art. This would not have been wielded by a common Hyksos citizen. The weapons like this would have been reserved for someone with money, a ruler, a pharaoh, one of his boys, a general. This is cream of the crop stuff. Now, once experts got the metals and, once they got this material back to a lab to where they could study it properly, what they've reported is that these weapons were bronze. Back in these ancient times during the second intermediate period, the Egyptians were using weapons made of copper. And bronze is a little stronger than copper because it's copper mixed with tin. And that tin gives the metal, it gives the blade a little bit more durability. It makes it a little stronger. You can sharpen it. It makes it a little bit sharper. And the fact that it's more durable means it's not going to break as easily in combat. A lot of these copper weapons of the Egyptians, you might have got a good use out of them, a good use or two. But a lot of times these copper weapons used by the Egyptians would chip and break and be damaged beyond repair. Whereas these bronze weapons used by the Hyksos people were a little bit more sturdy, a little bit more durable, and they could nick and chip and bend and scratch and just, be taken back to camp and repaired and reused. And because they were a little stronger, they were a little sharper, I believe. And so this is just one of the ways in which the Hyksos people were more advanced than the Egyptian people. Another way that they were more advanced is the chariot. Now, it's a reoccurring theme and belief that, chariots are so associated with Egyptians that people believe that Egyptian people, came up with the chariot, that they invented the chariot. But actually, the Egyptian people copied the chariot off of the Hyksos people. It was the Semitic Hyksos people who introduced the chariot to the Egyptians. So this is yet another way in which the Hyksos people, these people who the Egyptians had absolutely no respect for, these people that the Egyptians thought to be illiterate and, like low lives, of low status and occupation, these people were quite advanced in many ways, were quite superior to the Egyptians, at least in their design, in their weapons designs and in warfare. And the Hyksos employed the use of this chariot in their wars with the Egyptians, and it gave them a decisive and distinct advantage over the Egyptians. And even when the Egyptians tried to copy the design of the Hyksos chariot, their chariots still weren't as good. Of course, the Hyksos, being the originators and having the original concept and design of the chariot, their chariots were far superior than those of the Egyptians. The Hyksos chariots were faster, they had better maneuverability, they were more durable and sturdy. And so, that makes sense. If you want to learn Kung Fu, you're going to learn it from Jorge up the street, or you going to learn it from a Shaolin monk in northern China. Which one do you think is best? You think it's best to go get tacos from Italians and baby back ribs from Orientals, or do you think it's better to go get Kung Pao chicken from Orientals and big back baby barbecue ribs from, Big Daddies or something? You know what I mean? Anyway, not to get off on a tandem, the chariot, one of the big advantages that the Hyksos people had over the Egyptians, the use of this chariot. And finally is the composite bow we have here. Now, this just looks like any normal bow, but the thing that makes the composite bow unique is the interior design. The Hyksos people mastered the design of this composite bow to where they use different materials to coil and recoil in the inside of the bow to give it a greater tensile strength. The Hyksos composite bow was twice as powerful as the bow that the Egyptians used, giving the Hyksos once again a huge advantage over the Egyptians. The Hyksos could shoot from twice as far and hit the Egyptians. And let me just tell you, when you are in warfare and your enemies can hit you from a greater distance than you can hit them, or if your enemies can hit you and you cannot return fire or answer, that assault, that is very demoralizing. I reckon that the Hyksos, had the upper hand in every battle with these advantages that made them far superior. And we don't know what other advantages they held and wielded. We just have, these three. We don't know what other resources they deployed, or, we don't know what other gadgets they used, but here we have three, and they gave the Hyksos armies a decisive advantage over the Egyptians. Now, what we have here is the Turin's King list. And it is from one of the resources that I mentioned earlier. It is, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it's from the scribes and sages of the Ramses dynasty in 1250 BC. And why is the Turin's King list so important? Well, the Turin's King list is so important because it gives us the 6 rulers of the 15th dynasty. These sages and scribes from Pharaoh Ramses dynasty, they are one of the few resources, one of 3 in my opinion, one of 3 resources that we have on this time period. But this is so deep because the Turin's King list literally gives us the names of these 6 Semitic Lower Egypt, foreign ruler, Hyksos, pharaohs. Now, I know that was a lot. That was very verbose, okay? And I tend to be loquacious. Okay, those are words that I just been dying to use. I just learned them off my Word Genius email. Anyway, the Turin's King list gives us a list of 6 Hyksos pharaohs. These are Semitic rulers of Lower Egypt, ruling from the Nile Delta. And if you look, all of these names, with the exception of Apepi, because Apepi is the name of Egyptian god, or it's a name similar to the name of an Egyptian god. With the exception of Apepi, all of these other guys, they're using their regular, like, real names, and these are Semitic names. Shishai is a name very similar to the name of a Babylonian king, and we know that Babylonians are Semitic. We know that Amorites are Semitic. We know enough about Semitic people to know their language and, to know when a Semitic name is in front of us. So, looking at this list, why is this list so important to us? Why is the Turin's King list so important to us? Well, it's especially important to us in this video because Moses should be here. If we have been prudent and if we have been wise up until this point, Moses should be here. This is the 15th dynasty. This is a time period when foreign rulers took over Egypt. And if we have got our timelines right, and I said in my last video that I believe Moses was born around 1630. Well, this is the 1630 time period. From 1630 to about 1540, when the Hyksos are expelled from Egypt. This is the time period of these 6 Hyksos foreign rulers. This is the time period from about 1690 to 1640. This is when these 6 Hyksos pharaohs ruled. Moses should be here. Let me emphasize that. Moses should be here. This is the only time in Egyptian history where a foreign people of this magnitude and size and populace has lived in Egypt, thrived in Egypt, been enslaved, and left. If the Hyksos people are not Hebrews, then the story is not true. And these are the biggest rulers. The 15th dynasty, these are the 6 rulers of that dynasty. Now let's go through the names because I'm taking up too much time talking. So first we have Simkin, and he is a well-attested, well-rounded early ruler of the 15th dynasty. But here, I seem to contradict myself. I said 6 rulers given by the Turin King list, and here I have 8. Well, the reason I have this slash with Shishai's name after Simkin's is there's a big debate. There's a big debate among historians and experts and Egyptologists and archaeologists. There's always a big debate. There's always argument about who came first, who came last. For sure, I know these last 3 are in the correct order, but it is not written in stone if these first 3 ruled in this order. I am almost positive these last 3 ruled in the order that I have them. But there's a big debate on if Shishai was a ruler of the 14th dynasty or the 15th dynasty. Some experts say, he was a ruler of the 14th dynasty. Some experts say he was an early ruler of the 15th dynasty. Some experts say, no, he ruled at the end of the 14th dynasty and right when the 14th dynasty transitioned over into the 15th dynasty. And I'm not sure where the truth lies, but the Turin's King list gives us Simkin as one of the early rulers of the 15th dynasty. And he's a pretty well-attested, well-rounded, sturdy, solid Hyksos pharaoh. But so is Shishai. Shishai is well-grounded. The argument is just whether he was a ruler of the 14th or 15th dynasty. But the 15th dynasty came out of the 14th dynasty, so it seems natural that that argument would be in existence. Anyway, moving on. After Simkin, we have a Paranot. Once again, also a well-attested, well-rounded, well-grounded, firm ruler of Lower Egypt. 15th dynasty Hyksos Pharaoh. After him, we have Sakir-Har. Now, Sakir-Har is an even more and well-attested ruler than the first two. He was a very powerful 15th dynasty Hyksos Pharaoh. After him comes Kayan. Now, if Kayan isn't the most powerful 15th dynasty Hyksos ruler, he is second only to Apepi, who it's said by experts usurped the throne. Now, why do we have a slash after Kayan's name with the name Yanasi? Well, because Yanasi is Kayan's son, and Kayan named Yanasi in writing to succeed him as Pharaoh. So it is clear that Kayan wanted Yanasi to succeed him as Pharaoh, but experts believe that Apepi usurped the throne. He either usurped the throne from Kayan, or he usurped the throne from Kayan's son Yanasi. Whichever happened, Apepi comes in right after either Kayan or Yanasi, whoever he took the throne from. And Apepi is probably the most popular 15th dynasty Hyksos ruler, probably because of what he was able to accomplish in his 40-year reign. Now, after Apepi comes Kamudi, and Kamudi, you know, right off the bat, by being the very last ruler of the 15th dynasty, that gives him some credibility, because we know Moses ruled in Egypt before he left. You know, we know he exerted some influence and power in Egypt over the Egyptians before he left. And Kamudi is the last ruler of the 15th dynasty. He is the last pharaoh of the 15th dynasty. And we'll talk about him, and we'll talk about all these guys. We'll take a closer look at them in just 1 second. But before I do that, I want to go through some attributes that we know are identified with Moses. These are just 6 attributes, 6 characteristics, if you will, that are associated with the biblical narrative, that are associated with Moses in the biblical narrative. These are just some accolades that we know. You know, you can't get around these. You know, you can't separate Moses from these. The first one here I have Moses being a ruler of Egypt. Now, whether Moses was a pharaoh, whether he was one of these 15th dynasty Hyksos pharaohs or not, he was definitely someone who wielded a lot of power and influence. The biblical narrative has Moses going up against Pharaoh, defeating Pharaoh, and freeing his enslaved people. So this was a dude in some capacity who had some authority, some influence, some measure of power, and that's why I have ruler of Egypt. So coming in second here, I have defeats a Pharaoh. The biblical narrative says that Moses goes up against Pharaoh and defeats him in spectacular fashion, and you just can't get around that. A lot of people in the past who have said they've discovered Moses, I don't know how they held their head up. You know, they would say that, you know, oh, this is who I believe Moses was, but these people who they claim to be Moses, they never did any of these things. You couldn't attribute any of these accolades heaped upon Moses to these people who people have claimed to be Moses. Like, for example, people have thought that the Egyptian pharaoh Tutmosis III was Moses simply because he had the name Moses in his name. But Tutmosis never accomplished any of these things. He was a ruler of Egypt, and he was a successful ruler, a very successful ruler. I'll give him that. Not taking anything away from Tutmosis. But in order to be the biblical Moses, you have to fulfill the criteria, dude. You have to wear the shoes. Lace up the Nikes, boy. Not only was Moses a ruler of Egypt, he went up against a pharaoh and defeated him. Moving on, Moses, via the biblical narrative, Moses is going to leave Egypt. He's not just going to rule Egypt. He's just not going to wield influence and power in Egypt, he eventually leaves Egypt. And so you cannot be Moses unless you're fulfilling this criteria. Another thing Moses does, he performs miracles, and this is one of the ways in which he defeats this Pharaoh and makes him, influences him to release the enslaved Hebrew/Hyksos people. Now, this next one I just threw in, it's kind of a small attribute. The biblical narrative says that Moses had a relationship with an African nation. Now, the African nation that the biblical narrative gives is the Ethiopians. It was actually the Nubians, but let me explain to you why they said Ethiopians. In ancient times, historians and ancient writers, they didn't distinguish African tribes. Because Ethiopia was like this Negro stronghold, they called all African tribes Ethiopians. So south of Egypt are the Nubians and, the nation of Nubia. And so the Bible says that Moses married an Ethiopian woman, but Josephus clears it up. And in fact, it was a Nubian princess that Moses married. And so that's the biblical narrative. And I just threw that in there because if we're going to find the historical Moses, then he should be able to fulfill this criteria. Maybe we can't prove that he married a Nubian princess, but maybe we can establish some type of relationship that he had with the Nubian people. Mind you, and remember this, the Egyptians, they didn't have a very solid relationship with the Nubian people. They sometimes used the famous and renowned archers of the Nubian people because the Nubian archers were feared throughout the ancient world. It said that they could shoot a man's eye out in battle. And so other than these small talents that the African Nubians offered, the Egyptians really looked down upon the Nubian people. A famous and very successful Egyptian pharaoh, Senusret III, wrote that his Nubian neighbors were basically good for nothing. That's how he described them. So that lets you know, that gives you an indication of how the Egyptians felt about their southern neighbors. But Moses had a positive relationship with the Nubians, despite going to war with them. As Flavius Josephus says, he ends up marrying the Nubian princess. He has a positive relationship with them. The Bible says he marries an Ethiopian. He has a positive relationship with black folk. Last but not least, coming in last, to me, in my opinion, and you'll hear me say that all throughout this video, you'll hear me emphasize what I believe to be true as to what is proven fact. So coming in last, we have Moses worshiped one God, and that is a big one. To me, that is among the biggest. Performs miracles, worshiped one God, defeats a Pharaoh. Those are the things that make Moses Moses. And according to the Bible, Moses worshiped one God. He found God in his lifetime. And his finding of God encouraged him and motivated him and gave him the courage to come back and free his people. In real history, Moses would have been the first monotheist in Egypt. That title, a lot of people like to give that title to Egyptian Pharaoh Akhenaten, who came much later in the New Kingdom. But no, Moses, according to the biblical narrative, Moses would have been the first monotheist, meaning the first person to worship one God in the land of Egypt. And by the way, Egypt is a land of many gods. They worship hundreds of gods in Egypt. So that would have been a big deal. He would have stuck out like a sore thumb. Now, can we match up this criteria? Can we match up the accolades that the biblical narrative gives us on Moses? Can we match up the attributes of Moses? Can we match up the talents, the deeds, the events? Can we match up these descriptions that the biblical narrative gives us of Moses? Can we match them up to one of these 6 rulers? Can we match them up to one of the 6 rulers of the 15th Hyksos dynasty. Now, everybody gets an arrow from ruler of Egypt. And this is kind of messed up. It's not showing my arrow because this is a new program that didn't quite cross over correctly. But just take my word for it. Everybody gets an arrow from ruler of Egypt because all of these Hyksos foreign Semitic pharaohs ruled Egypt in some capacity, whether they ruled just Lower Egypt or whether they ruled Lower Egypt and parts of Middle Egypt or whether they ruled Egypt in its entirety. All of these guys get an arrow from ruler of Egypt. But here's the thing. These first guys, Simkin, Aperanat, and Sakir Har, they have to be eliminated. And I think it's safe to eliminate them. Simkin, Aperanat, and Sakir Har are the first early rulers of the 15th dynasty. And here's why I say they should be eliminated. You can't be Moses with someone coming behind you ruling for 10, 20, and 30 years. If you're Simkin, how are you Moses if you rule for 10 or 20 or 30 years and then here comes this guy, Aperanat, behind you? He's going to rule for another 10 or 20 or 30 years. And behind him, Sakir Har is going to come in and rule for another 10 or 20 or 30 years. How can you be Moses if you're Simkin? That does not match up with the biblical narrative. The biblical narrative says that Moses ruled, he performed miracles, he defeated a Pharaoh, and then he left. And so you can't be Moses having people usurp your throne and come and rule for years upon years after you. You can't have person upon person ruling for years upon years after you. And in my original slide, let me tell you, I had an arrow pointing appropriately, nice and neat to everybody. But yeah, that old computer is a piece of crap, and I had to switch computers and programs, so it's a little distorted. Moving on. Eliminating the first three, that leaves us with the last three rulers of the 15th dynasty. These Hyksos pharaohs, Kayan, Apepi, and Kamudi. If we have been prudent and wise, if we are as smart as we think we are, if Soapman is as bad as he thinks he is, then Moses should be here. Now, who do you think it is? Tell me. I want you to guess right now. And by the end of this video, I want you to tell me if you were right. Who do you think Moses is? He is one of these three people I'm going to tell you right now. He is one of these three people. Who do you think he is? Starting off with Kayan. Kayan is a well-attested, well-rooted, well-grounded, was an immensely powerful ruler of the 15th dynasty. He was a pharaoh who wielded power all around the Mediterranean Sea. And so they have found writings and figurines and, evidence of Kayan's influence has been found all around the Mediterranean Sea, even as far as Crete. And so this is an attestation to his power, his might. And I believe a lot of that power and might came from this humongous trading network that he had all around the Mediterranean Sea, supplying him with wealth, supplying him with fame, supplying him with influence. They have found Greek settlements in the Nile Delta near Avaris. So we know that these lower Egypt Hyksos rulers, they networked with different cultures and different races. And so Kayan is a well-attested, really hardcore, powerful 15th dynasty ruler. But here's why Kayan can't be Moses. Experts say that Apepi usurped the throne from Kayan. Now, others argue that no, Kayan, he put in writing that Yanasi was to succeed him, and Yanasi did succeed him. That's what some experts say. But I say, does it matter? Whether it was Kayan or his son Yanasi who got the throne usurped from them, they got usurped. That does not fit the biblical narrative at all. The biblical narrative does not speak to Moses being usurped or his power being taken or threatened or, that just didn't happen. So in my opinion, Cayenne is out. He can't be Moses. Skipping Apepi down to Kamudi. As I said before, it gives Kamudi credibility, being the last foreign Hyksos pharaoh of the 15th dynasty. And it also gives him credibility in that he left Egypt. But here's the thing. When Kamudi left Egypt, he left with his tail between his legs. Defeated by the son of second Enrei Tau, Ahmose, Kamudi was run out of Egypt sometime around the 13th year of his reign. He reigned either between, he reigned about between 11 and 13 years. And at the end of his reign, he was defeated by Egyptian Pharaoh Ahmose, and he was run out of Egypt in spectacular fashion, chased clear across the Sinai desert. Now, a lot of people think that Ahmose was the pharaoh of the Exodus because he kicked Kamudi's ass clear across the Sinai desert, but that doesn't match with the biblical narrative. In the biblical narrative, Moses doesn't get defeated by a pharaoh. He defeats a pharaoh. In fact, there is no account of Moses ever losing a fight, a contest, or a battle, hands down, period. And we'll talk about that in a second also. So, if you eliminate Cayenne and eliminate Kamudi, that leaves only Apepi, aka Apophis, also pronounced Apophis. Now, people say that Apepi usurped the throne, and I want to address that because I don't believe that Apepi usurped the throne. Imagine this for a second. If you're Cayenne and you're a successful and powerful and wealthy ruler, if you're a successful and powerful 15th dynasty Hyksos pharaoh, why would you just give up power to Apepi without a fight? Why would you just hand over power to Apepi without a fight? You've got the muscle to fight. You've got the money to fight. You've got the know-how to fight. You've been successful up until this point. Even if Apepi was some unknown powerful threat coming out of nowhere, why wouldn't you at least put up an inkling of a fight? That doesn't make much sense to me, that Apepi would just be able to come in and usurp the throne from so powerful a ruler as Cayenne or his son Yanasi. But if you go back to the biblical narrative, a lot of people don't talk about this, but after Moses experienced what he experienced with the burning bush and at Mount Sinai, the Bible says that he came back and he had relationships and negotiations with the elders of the Hebrew people living at that time in Egypt. So Moses comes back to Egypt. He has these talks and negotiations with the elders of the Hebrew people, and he brings them back to Mount Sinai. And they have these negotiations, and I don't really know what they talk about, but what I think they talk about is they agree to give Moses power. Because if Apepi is Moses, he has a bigger agenda. I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words. If Apepi is indeed and in fact Moses, if he is the biblical Moses, he has a bigger agenda than ruling Egypt. He plans on leaving Egypt, and he plans on leaving with all the slaves. Now, let's take a closer look at Apepi, because I'm going to tell you right off the jump, this name jumps out at me something fierce. Apepi. Apepi, also pronounced Apepi. He was also known as Apophis or Apophis. And what's so particular and peculiar about this name is it is eerily similar to the god of chaos, evil, and destruction. The Egyptian god of evil, chaos, and destruction, Apep, represented by a huge, ginormous serpent. Now, who exactly is Apep? My mother does not like for me to talk about the Egyptian gods, so give me just like 60 seconds. If you remember going back to one of my earliest videos, Moses and the Big Bang Theory, I talked about the Egyptian creation story, and I talked about how this godlike entity, Amun, or the Amen, came and rose out of a sea of chaos. Well, I didn't tell the whole story. What this godlike entity left behind in the sea of chaos once it rose from it was Apep. And Apep is the other side of this godlike entity, Amun. It's the evil side, it's the chaotic side, it's the destructive side. And Apep is in a never-ending struggle to reunite itself with this godlike entity, Amun. So when Amun eventually manifests into this god Amun-Ra, who I've talked about before, Apep is now in this never-ending battle and struggle with Amun-Ra. And Amun-Ra can't really kill Apep because every time he destroys him, Apep is just like Wolverine. He just comes back and regenerates or just grows a new limb or body. And so it's a never-ending and eternal struggle. But the thing I want you to realize is Apep is the bad guy in all of this, and Amun-Ra is the good guy. And the Egyptians, this would have been known to the Egyptians. So by Apepi taking on this name similar to Apep, what he is saying to the Egyptians is, yeah, take that, up yours, That's what Apepi is saying to the Egyptian people. He's saying to them, you don't like me? Well, screw you. I don't like you either. And not only that, I'm gonna press down hard on you with my thumb, baby. Who wanted what? That is what Apepi is saying to these people by taking on this name. Understand that the god Apep, in the eyes of the Egyptians, is the equivalent of the devil. What Apepi is doing by taking on this throne name, and that's what Apepi is. It's a throne name. This is not this man's birth name. So if you're sitting at home like, oh, why is his name Apepi and not Moses? Well, Apepi is what is called a throne name or a pre-name. And it's a name that a pharaoh would take once he becomes pharaoh, once he comes into power. And so by taking on the throne name or pre-name of Apepi, what this individual, be he Moses or not, what he's saying, in my opinion, is screw Egypt. Screw everything you stand for. This dude, whoever he is, he gives no you-know-what. He has nothing but contempt for this culture, for these people. And who does that fit? If you remember in my last video, I talked about Moses growing up as a young child, being educated in the royal house. And I talked about how I thought that he knew people were trying to kill him. And I also talked about how he knew he lived a privileged lifestyle while his people were being tormented and abused outside those palace walls. So no one fits this narrative better than Moses, as someone who would have nothing but utter contempt for the Egyptians. And this guy Apepi, he is just really giving the Egyptians the middle finger and telling them to kiss his petunia. So I have to say, a lot of experts, they don't believe that, well, I shouldn't say a lot. Some experts don't believe that this Hyksos pharaoh Apepi is associating himself with the Egyptian god Apep. They say it's different iconography used, it's different imagery used, it's different symbolism used when using the name of the Hyksos pharaoh Apepi than as opposed to using the Egyptian god Apep. They say it's different symbolism and iconography used, and different, imagery and hieroglyphs. Let me tell you something, man. Moses spoke many languages. He was a Hyksos/Hebrew. We have evidence that they were developing an alphabet as far back as Joseph's time, which would have been hundreds of years before Moses. He spoke Egyptian. He was educated in many languages. The Bible and other resources say that he was an ambassador to many nations. So he spoke several languages. The man would have used different imagery, iconography, and symbolism all the time, depending on who he was talking to. So I'm not trying to hear that. I believe this man deliberately and intentionally took on the name of the Egyptian god of chaos, evil, and destruction, Apep, and I believe he did it to send a message, but I don't want to dwell on that. Moving on. Get ready to add another line to Apep's name, because indeed, he does defeat a Pharaoh in an incredibly spectacular fashion. And it all starts between this correspondence between Apepi. It all starts with this correspondence between Apepi and 17th dynasty Egyptian pharaoh Seqenen-Re-Tau. Now, Seqenen-Re-Tau was the 17th dynasty ruler ruling from the capital in Upper Egypt, the capital Thebes in Upper Egypt. And so once again, going back to the sages and scribes of the Ramses dynasty in 1250 BC, they give explicit detail on this quarrel between Seqenen-Re-Tau and Apepi, and it's literally called the quarrel between Apepi and Seqenen-Re-Tau. And so the Egyptian scribes and sages of the Ramses dynasty, they spoke about how Seqenen-Re-Tau received a messenger at his court, and the messenger he bared a message from Apepi. He was one of Apepi's couriers. So you have Apepi ruling basically all of Egypt, and Seqenen-Re-Tau just has this small little area around Thebes where he rules. And so by Apepi being in control of Egypt economically, he has a very distinct advantage. He has a lot of leverage and influence over this 17th dynasty. And so Apepi and Seqenen-Re, they start corresponding. And at this time, the 15th dynasty is trading peacefully with the 17th dynasty. And there is peace. You know, we're in the second intermediate period, and there's a lot of wars, multiple dynasties and pharaohs ruling together. But at the time of this particular correspondence, there was peace and peaceful trading between the 15th and 17th dynasty. So the Egyptian sages and scribes of the Ramses dynasty, 1250 BC, they talk about how Seqenen-Re-Tau receives Apepi's courier at court. And he says to Apepi's messenger, "Why is it that you have come to me? What message could you possibly have to give to me?" And Apepi's courier either reads him the message or gives him the message, and this is what it says. And I want to tell you this before I read this. If Apepi is indeed and in fact Moses, then here we have literally by Moses' own hand, we have writing from him, giving us insight into his character, how he thinks, and who he is. This is huge to me. This is extra biblical narrative. This is not, the Bible is history, but this is history outside the Bible. If Apepi is in fact Moses, then these are his own words written by his own hand. Now, let me read them, and I quote. This is what Apepi says to Seqenen-Re-Tau. "Expel the hippopotami from the swamp on the eastern waters of the city." Okay, I know you laughing at me and making fun of me right now, but a little bit of dramatic effect for your entertainment and viewing pleasure here. Okay, just bear with me, okay? This is how I imagine he would have said it, okay? This is 15th dynasty Hyksos ruler Apepi, his letter to Seqenen-Re-Tau, and I quote, "Expel the hippopotami from the swamp on the eastern waters of the city. For they do not allow that sleep come to me day or night, because their noise is in my ear. Now, it probably does not help that Apepi is over 500 miles away from Second in Raytao. Apepi's at Avarice, and Second in Raytao's in Thieves. So Apepi's between 500 to 800 miles away from this dude, telling him to get rid of his hippopotami pool because they're too noisy, keeping him up day and night. And as you can imagine, Second in Raytao, 17th dynasty Egyptian pharaoh, he is livid. He is, he's probably aghast. He probably gasped and clutched his pearls. He was probably mortified. The nerve of this Lower Egypt ruler, the nerve of this foreign dog, this Semitic Hyksos ruler of Lower Egypt, having the gall, having the nuts, I'm sorry for lack of a better word, having the cojones to try to tell me what to do with my stuff, to try to command me, Second in Raytao, true Egyptian pharaoh of the 17th dynasty. His heritage went back far probably, and here you have this Hyksos, this Hebrew pharaoh, telling him to get rid of his hippopotamus pool. So Second in Raytao got pissed, and he took Apepi to war. Naturally, it was a slap in the face, the ultimate insult, and he responded in kind. He went to war. So let's dig into this a little deeper, because a hippopotamus, what was so insulting? Why was it that deep? Why did he have to take him to war? I mean, I'm sure people have went to war for less, but in this particular instance, it has experts baffled what this letter means. What could it have meant? Well, I think I know. If you remember, in the biblical narrative, well, first of all, let me just say this. Experts say that this was a shot at Second in Ray's wife. Okay, I don't know how that is, but that's what some experts believe. Other experts believe it was an insult to the Egyptian gods. One of the Egyptian gods is a hippopotamus. Some other experts believe it was an insult to the god Seth, because the hippopotamus is the living embodiment of the god Seth. I don't know what it is about hippopotamuses. Over there in Egypt, that must be like a sacred thing, a big deal. I mean, but, obviously Apepi was taking a jab at Second in Raytao. Obviously, he was trying to get under his skin. Obviously, he was poking his chest out a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit. But still, go to war? Your Second in Raytao was already at a disadvantage. Apepi basically ruled Egypt. He was more powerful than Second in Raytao. Yet Second in Raytao was so enraged and insulted, he took Apepi to war. But I don't think it necessarily went that way. If you remember the biblical narrative, Moses goes to war with his brother. Could it be that Apepi was really identifying himself through that letter? Could it be that Apepi was revealing his true identity to his brother Second in Raytao? What if, just imagine this for a second. What if Apepi, who used to live in the same palace as Second in Raytao, always complained because his room was near the hippopotamus pool on the eastern waters? What if when Moses fell out with the Egyptians and ran away, he's like, I'm gonna get revenge, I'll show you. Now, here you have this ruler of the 15th dynasty named Apepi. That's not his real name, that's his throne name. He's sending a letter to Second in Raytao about some hippopotamus. The sages and scribes of the Ramses dynasty say that when Second in Raytao received Apepi's message, that he stood still, staring off into nothing for an abnormally long time. They emphasize that he stood still for an abnormally long time, as if contemplating something he did not understand. But I believe, emphasize, I believe he understood very well exactly what he was up against. I believe that letter was meant for him and him only, and was meant to be understood by him and him only. Put yourself in Second in Raytow's shoes. You know that if this is Moses, you grew up with this dude, you know him, you know how dangerous he is, you know how smart he is, you know of the prophecy of him, you know he is a military genius who has never lost a fight. He probably left your palace swearing revenge and swearing to free all the enslaved Hebrew/Hyksos people. I believe Second in Raytow went to war with the Pepi because he felt he had absolutely no choice. And so he took a Pepi to war. And he got absolutely obliterated. If you did not hear me before, I have tried to emphasize this time and time again. When you pick a fight with Moses, you are going to die. He will not only beat you, he will humiliate you. He will string you up and hang you out to dry. There is not another human being in history who can measure up against the military prowess of Moses. Not Genghis Khan, not Napoleon, not Alexander the Great, even one of my favorites, King David, King of Israel. They cannot lace Moses' boots or sandals. They cannot wipe his rear. This man was the greatest military strategist, the greatest military genius to ever take a battlefield, period. And when you pick a fight with Moses, you are going to die. Remember back in my last video, we talked about how the Egyptians sent Moses to either defeat the Nubians or to be killed by them. And what happened? Moses came back victorious. He defeated the Nubian army in spectacular fashion. He didn't just beat them, he beat them in a spectacular way that we won't go into, but it was in a way in which nobody ever thought could be done. He takes the capital city of Nubia and marries the princess, for God's sakes. This is a man they sent to the slaughter. He came back triumphant, in a way more triumphant. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. When you pick a fight with Moses, you are going to die, and that is exactly what happened to Second in Raytow. Look at this CAT scan image. Look at this CT image of Second in Raytow's mummy. It's full of holes. You have this humongous gaping Grand Canyon of a crack ravine in the top of his forehead. Over here on his right brow, you got a hole. I would think it was a gunshot if this wasn't from ancient times. Let's take a look at his real mummy. Looking at Second in Raytow's real mummy, you can see he got his head knocked up. This is the most brutal ass whooping I have ever seen in my life. If you look at my arrow at the middle of the screen. Right here in his left cheek, you have a hole, probably by an arrow or a spear or a dagger. Above his right brow, which is crushed, you have another open hole, another gaping wound, probably from a spear, a knife, a dagger, or an axe. Up top, at the top of his forehead, this is almost certainly an execution wound made by an axe. And just mind you, this wound is characteristic of the Hyksos axe. This wound is characteristic and it fits perfectly with the design of the axes that the Hyksos people were using. Go down here, his left cheekbone is completely crushed along with his left orbital bone. This dude got mucked up. He got mauled. Some experts had the nerve to say they believe he was assassinated, but Those are the words of experts who have never been in a fight. Those are the words of people who have never scrapped a day in their life. They've never thrown a punch, couldn't punch their way out of a wet paper bag. This dude wasn't assassinated. If you were assassinated, you'd have like a wound to the back of your head. They'd find poison in your system, or maybe your throat would be cut. We're just looking at this image of this guy's skull. His body was also riddled with holes, abused. This dude was abused. He got drugged. We have words for this in my culture. He got mollywopped. He got his hat handed to him. He got drugged through the mud in the club from the window to the wall. I mean, I'm not trying to be funny, man. They really did a number on this dude, and he was a king. Forensic experts, FBI, and crime scene analysts in this country believe that Second in Ray Tao was brought down off of his chariot, and I agree with them. If you're a Pharaoh going into battle, you're going to be on a chariot. It's going to be well armed. You're going to have a number of chariots around you, guarding you. And if that was so, that's just another attestation to the military prowess and the superior military strategy of the Hyksos people. They were able to bring this dude down off of his chariot. Experts in criminal homicide and FBI experts say that this dude was brought down off his chariot either with arrows, spears, or a combination of the two, after which he was subsequently beaten to a literal pulp. Now, it is Egyptian tradition that a general or a ruler or a pharaoh or anyone of high ranking captured during warfare would have been brought back to the opposing army's leader, general, or pharaoh and publicly executed. What I am trying to get you to understand is that Second in Ray Tao would have been brought down off of his chariot, surrounded, beaten to a pulp. That's probably how he got these wounds to the cheek and the right orbital bone. But he would have been brought back to the Hyksos general or Hyksos ruler or Hyksos pharaoh present at the battle scene. That would have been a Pepi, aka Moses, and that individual would have publicly executed this individual. Moses publicly executed Second in Ray Tao with his own hands. Experts say that he laid Second in Ray Tao. Experts say that Second in Ray Tao laid in this position on his left side. The reason they know that is because they have seen evidence that his blood pooled and spilled out of his skull from the left side and laid in that pool on his left side for a great deal of time before he was moved. They found impression marks and evidence from where the blood pooled out of his left side, and they've also found evidence from where his head lay in that pool of blood on his left side. So we know that when he was executed, he was laid down on his left side as he is in this fashion. We also know that his hands were bound. And here's how we know his hands were bound. Look at the hands on the mummy of Second in Ray Tao. Here, take a closer look. They are contracted, they are contorted. Experts say this is what happens to drowning victims or victims who are executed when their hands are bound behind them or tied behind them. Because you can't use your hands to defend yourself when they're tied down or tied behind you. Because you cannot use your hands when you're drowning, they contort and constrict at the time of death and lock up in this fashion. So this is consistent with Second in Ray Tao being captured, brought back to the Hyksos general, which would have been a Pepi / Moses. This is consistent with Second in Ray Tao being captured, brought back a prisoner, and publicly executed, as was common at that time in ancient Egypt. Now here you are looking at the stele. This is a stele. It's just like a stone tablet in which the Egyptians would write on, leaving records of their great triumphs, of their great deeds. And this is a stele of Kamose. Kamose is the son of Second Enretau, and he took over the 7th dynasty when his father was brutally executed. Now, naturally, Kamose, he has it in for Pepi. He hates this dude. This dude murdered his father. This foreign Hebrew Pharaoh not only murdered his father, he's imposing heavy taxes all over the land of Egypt. He's ruling Egypt. So Kamose, he naturally hates Pepi's guts. And the reason I have Kamose's stele up is because he leaves a lot of valuable information via the hand of his scribes. He leaves a lot of valuable information on this character Pepi. He gives a lot of insight as to how he feels about Pepi, which gives us insight on Pepi in general. Now, this is what Kamose says, and I'm quoting him, so pay attention. This is Kamose, his stele, and I'm quoting him through his scribes. No one can be at ease when they are milked by the taxes of the Asiatics. I shall grapple with him, meaning Pepi. I shall grapple with him, that I may crush his belly. For my desire is to rescue Egypt, which the Asiatics have destroyed. So here you see Kamose via his scribes on his stele, and he's complaining about the taxes that Pepi and the Asiatics have been imposing on the land of Egypt. And he literally says he wants to crush the man's belly. I mean, that's kind of weird, but anyway, I'm going to quote what else he says. He says, also about Pepi, he says, you in your capacity as suzerain have made me chief. So he's saying, you, Pepi, in your capacity as leader, you have the nerves to just call me a chief. And you're going to see this is a reoccurring theme with Kamose. Let me go on. I'm quoting him. He says, your speech is mean when you make me as a chieftain while you are a ruler. So see, right off the bat, Kamose seems to have a problem with Pepi not viewing them as equals. He's saying, yeah, okay, Pepi, you're a ruler, but you're not recognizing me as your equal. You're not recognizing me as a co-ruler of Egypt. You're making yourself out to be a pharaoh, and you're making me out to be a chieftain, and you're not treating me with the respect that you should treat someone who is your equal. And so he really has a problem with that, and you see that's a big problem for Pharaoh Kamose. And this is really rare. Rarely do you ever see Egyptians making their gripes and complaints public. You know, if anything, they'll exaggerate or just lie. But here you see Kamose, he is so... Pepi has so gotten under his skin. He literally says, your speech is mean. Like they're 12 years old. This dude... Pepi has obviously got him out of his element. Let's continue on. Still quoting Kamose from his stele. And I quote, your mouth is narrowed when you make me a chief and yourself a ruler of Upper Egypt. See, like I said, this dude, he really has a problem. He really does not like that. He feels that Pepi is treating him as a lesser ruler. Let me keep going. He says, your boast, making me out a vassal while you are the sovereign. And he goes on to say, this Pepi is a chieftain of retinue. So in this last line, he literally uses Pepi's name, and he calls him a chieftain of retinue. Now, he's like, oh, I'm not a chief, you're a chief. You know, he's going back and forth like, you know, they're 6 years old. Now, retinue, this is the name that the Egyptians used for the land of Canaan, which is modern day Israel. So here, Kamose, if you didn't believe me before, Kamose is putting it in his own words. He's saying, this dude Apepi, he is not an Egyptian. He is an Asiatic. He is a foreigner from the land of Canaan, the land of Retenue, modern day Israel. Moving on. Kamose ends, this is the last slide I have of Kamose, and this is what he says, and I quote, "What power can I claim to have when I am stuck between an Asiatic and a Nubian? Each of them has a piece of Egypt too and shares the land with me. My aim is to liberate Egypt and crush the Asiatics." So Kamose is hell-bent on not only avenging his father, but liberating the Egyptian people, being recognized as a hero, and finally, and probably most important, not being called and recognized as a chieftain. That boy does not like that word chief. I'm sorry, it's just funny to me. Moving on, get ready to add another arrow to Apepi's name. Now this is all messed up, and I apologize for that. I had this nice and neat, but my last computer crashed, and so this arrow is actually supposed to come from Performs Miracles. And the reason I have Performs Miracles next is because after Kamose dies, and we know Kamose dies, he dies, we believe, experts believe he dies in the 6th year of his reign. You know, experts only gave Kamose 3 years until they found his stela. Let's go back to his stela. Experts only gave Kamose a short 3-year reign. But after they found this stela, which was created in the 5th year of his reign, they said, oh, okay, we better give him an extra year. So they gave him 6 years. Now, the reason we know Kamose died is because his mama took over the throne after he died. Now, the only way, if you're an Egyptian pharaoh, the only way your mama is going to take over rule is if you die. So we know that Kamose died because his mama took over rule of Egypt after the 6th year of his reign. And she continued to rule Egypt until Kamose's younger brother, Ahmose, became old enough to rule Egypt. Seqenen-Retau had 2 sons, Kamos and Ahmose. Kamos died after reigning in Upper Egypt, Thebes. He died after a 6-year reign, and then Ahmose took over, Kamose ruled for 6 years, then his mama took over for a number of years until Kamos's younger brother Ahmose became old enough to rule as pharaoh. And Ahmose also created a stele. He co-ruled with his brother Kamos, but after Kamos died and mom took over, Ahmose eventually came of age and took over as ruler of Egypt. And he learned a lot from the failures of his brother Kamos and father Seqenen-Retau, both who fell victim to Apepi in warfare. So he's learned a lot, and his mom has groomed him to be the ultimate warrior, so to speak. And this is his stele. And his stele is pertinent because in his stele, he talks about during the wars with Apepi, which he was not a part of, but during the wars that his brother and father had with Apepi, Ahmose talks about an everlasting and never-ending storm. He says there was this storm that fell upon the land of Egypt, and it lasted for several weeks without end. And he doesn't go into very much detail about this storm other than to say it damages a number of monuments, tombs, and pyramids. And later in Ahmose's reign, he's going to go on a big, huge construction project to rebuild the damage from this huge storm, this never-ending, everlasting storm. That's how he describes it. He doesn't give much detail, but he does say that one of the things that this storm brings about was an intense, unique darkness unlike any the Egyptians have ever seen before. He says that it was so dark that even a torch in your hand was useless. This is what Moses says. Now, this is eerily similar to the admonitions of Epor. It is also eerily similar to one of the 10 plagues of Egypt. And that's why the stele of Amos is included in this presentation. He speaks of an everlasting, never-ending storm, or a storm that lasts for several weeks on end without ceasing. And he says one of the things that the storm produces is an intense and unique darkness. So get ready to add another arrow to Apepi's name. Why? Because Apepi worshipped one God, and that is the god Seth. Now, the Egyptian scribes and sages, they wrote about how Apepi only worshipped the god Seth. They say in all the land of Egypt, Seth was the only god that Apepi worshipped. And they say that he offered sacrifices to the god Seth daily. They also say that he built a very sacred temple specifically for the worship of the god Seth. Now, I know what you're thinking. Because, of course, Soapman can read minds. You're saying, well, Moses didn't worship the god Seth. He worshiped, the Hebrew God. So this guy can't be Moses. But think about this. Who is the Egyptian god Seth? Let me tell you. The Egyptian god Seth is the god of the desert. He is the god of the desert and the god of storms. And where did Moses encounter God? In the biblical narrative, where was Moses when he encountered God? That's right. He was in the desert. And if you were Moses, educated in a royal Egyptian household, the only gods you knew were the Egyptian pantheon of gods. The only desert god you would have ever learned about was the god Seth. So when Moses fled Egypt knowing no other gods but the Egyptian gods, and he meets God in the desert, who do you think he thought that was? I believe he thought it was the god Seth. So he returns to Egypt, worshiping only the god Seth and encouraging everyone else to do so also. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, first of all, if you were an Egyptian, Seth is one of the lower gods. You don't build sacred temples to worship him. You build sacred temples to worship the higher gods, such as Amun or Amun-Ra. So for Apepi to build a sacred temple and only worship one of the lower gods, Seth, that was religious sacrilege. In addition to the name, the throne or pre-name he chose, he was committing a religious sin by worshiping Seth exclusively and in the fashion he was worshiping him. Not to mention, Seth was considered by the Egyptians an evil god. He was also the equivalent of the devil. So Apepi was worshiping the devil like twice. But Seth didn't start out as an evil god. He actually started out as a good god. He started out as the god of love who helped people transition over into the afterlife. He even is said to have helped defeat the serpent god Apep. So how did he become evil? Well, during the Old Kingdom, Seth was a good god. It was only between the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom, Moses' time, where he becomes bad. He becomes this evil god who usurps the throne from his brother, who kills his brother, and then chops his brother up into bloody pieces so that he can't come back to life. Before his brother dies, he's able to create an heir, Horus. And Seth is then locked in this long, prolonged battle between between him and his nephew Horus, in which Horus eventually defeats his uncle and is victorious as the high god. Horus is another high-ranking god. So why would Moses choose this loser god to worship? Because he obviously is an evil god. He's obviously not popular and shouldn't be worshipped in the way that Apepi is worshiping him. Well, I don't think the god Seth was evil until after Moses, and here's why. Another characteristic given to Seth when he became evil was red hair. Now, we've talked about that before. You saw in the Joseph statue, he either had red hair or a red wig. We talked about in the Abraham story, Jacob and Esau. Esau was born covered in red hair. And we talked about the giants of the antediluvian time, pre-flood time. Giants having reddish or blonde hair. And here we have Seth being given red hair after he turns evil, probably because he's somehow tied to Moses. Moving on, get ready to draw another arrow to Apepi. This dude is on a roll and looking more and more like Moses every slide. Now, this is weak evidence, but I believe Apepi, if you go back, this line is coming from leaves Egypt. Now, my evidence is weak, but I believe Apepi left Egypt, and here's why. Kamos defeated and humiliated short reign having Pharaoh, who Apepi defeated. Kamos lies in his stele and says he defeats his enemy and crushes him and goes to the city of Avarice and tears it down and brings down its walls and utterly destroys the inhabitants. Now, we know this is a lie because Avarice is later destroyed like some 15 years later after Kamos's death. And it's destroyed by Kamos's brother, Amos. Amos is the one who destroys the city of Avarice, the Hyksos capital of Avarice. And he does this after he beats up and kicks out Kamudi. But what happens to Apepi? We know that Kamos dies after 6 years reigning. But there's no account of what happened to Apepi. Experts say he died, but why? There's no account of him dying. There's no tomb. We know Kamose lies about killing him. Amose doesn't. You don't hear a peep from him about Apepi, though he does brag about how he kicked Kamudi's ass. There's no recollection of Apepi after Kamose's death. This is because I believe he left. And I think he took a good portion of the Hebrew/Hyksos people with him when he did, leaving a small remnant which Kamudi ruled over, which was not sufficient enough to mount a defense against Egyptian Pharaoh Amose. Now, I know that's verbose and confusing. This slide that you see, this is an image of a sphinx created for Amenemhat, a Middle Kingdom Egyptian pharaoh. It's either Amenemhat or Amenhotep. I'm not sure which pharaoh that it was created for, but it doesn't matter because it's accredited to Apepi. And the reason it's accredited to Apepi is because Apepi scratched off the name of the original owner and wrote his own. He either scratched off or chiseled off or hammered off any evidence, any ownership of the prior owner. He removed it and just put his name. Like, dude, this is just like straight up New York graffiti. This dude is a trip. He doesn't build his own monuments and structures. He just scratches the name off of yours and writes his name on it and lays claim to it. Now, why would he do this? I believe it's because if you're an Egyptian pharaoh and you want to build a monument, that's going to take time. And you're going to have to stick around to oversee its construction and building. Well, Apepi doesn't plan to do that. He doesn't plan on sticking around. And so he doesn't build very many structures and monuments. It is said that he, however, it is said, howbeit, that he meticulously writes and makes copies of writings. And this is in line with the biblical narrative of Moses, always writing and putting down events in books. Apepi had his sages and scribes copy and make multiple copies of almost everything. It was an obsession of his. But he didn't build very many structures. He just wrote his name on yours. And I believe that is because he had no intention of staying in Egypt. Now, get ready to draw one final line to Apepi. The only thing left is he had a relationship with the Nubians. I really hate how this slide looks. I had this all neat and nice looking where the arrows went right from the accolade to Apepi, and now it's just all jacked up, and I really hate that, and I really apologize for that. But this is my third time shooting this video because the first 2 times I shot it on a crappy computer that just gave me the blues. So moving on, let's add one more line. The final line, if you didn't think we were going to connect, has a relationship with the Nubians, you were wrong. Let's just go back to the time that Kamose ruled. After the death of Second Enrei-Tau, Kamose was hell-bent on getting revenge for his father. But the Egyptians around him, they did not support him. They did not want to go to war with the Apepi. They like, dude, this dude is a beast. Plus, you know, I mean, things ain't that bad. You know what I mean? Egypt is a wealthy place. The Nile Delta is the most fertile part of the land, but that doesn't mean the rest of the land isn't fertile. And these Egyptians, they getting fat, even though they have to pay hefty taxes to Apepi. And they don't want to stir the pot with Kamose. They don't want to go to war with Apepi. And so Kamose, he needs a reason, and he's just looking for a reason to mount support against Apepi and to take him to war. And he finally gets that reason when he intercepts a courier of Apepi, taking a message to the king of Nubia. Kamose's men intercept this courier, and this is what the message says. And once again, if Apepi is indeed and in fact the biblical Moses, then this is Moses' thoughts, his own handwriting, his own intellect, and a window into the characteristic, into the soul of this man. And this is the letter that Kamose intercepted from Apepi, from Apepi's courier, on his way to the king of Nubia in the south, pressing up, eating and gobbling up territory, making their way towards Thebes. And Apepi says to the king of Nubia in his letter, he says, and I quote, "Why did you not tell me you had become or made yourself king? Come north. There is no need to worry. Kamose is busy with me here. We will divide the towns of Egypt between us, and Nubia will rejoice." Now check this out. This is deeper than deep to me. Listen to what Apepi says to the king of Nubia. He says, he speaks to him as if he's an old friend. He speaks to him like it's his cousin. He's like, "Dawg, what up? What? Dawg, what's up? Why didn't you tell me you was king, man? Get up here." He tells him, "Come north." He says, "Get up here." He goes on to say, there is no need to worry. This dude is this dude is a trip. He is talking cash. You know what? As my mother would say, sound like jive to me. He's telling the king of Nubia, he's like, dude, I didn't know you had came up. Come north. Don't even trip. He says, Kamose is busy with me here. Translation, he's like, I got Kamose, I'm holding him back by his forehead while he's swinging, hitting nothing but air, trying to take shots at my torso. Once again, this is a testament to Moses / Apepi's military prowess, he's not asking the king of Nubia for help. He is not asking him for help. He's telling him, I've left this dude's land wide open for you. Come north. There's no need to worry. Kamose ain't gonna do squat. He's got his hands full with me right now. You're good. Don't even worry about it. He ends by saying, we will divide the towns of Egypt between us, and Nubia will rejoice. He didn't say we will he didn't say we will rejoice. He did not say we will rejoice. He said Nubia will rejoice. And I think this is a testament to the fact that Apepi had no intentions of staying in the land of Egypt. Experts have also uncovered and excavated, and they can testify to the fact that when the Nubians were invading from the south, the Hyksos people who were in Upper Egypt and in the south, they stayed to themselves and let the Nubians run amok. So they literally shared and divided the land between them. Ladies and gentlemen, I have taken up enough of your time. This was a season finale double episode. Before I go, I want you to consider what we talked about. I may not have shown or proved how Apepi threw his staff down and it became a serpent, but I want you to consider the things that I did say and the things that I did show you. And I want to ask you, who in your entire lifespan has made a better case for the biblical Moses? Who have you ever heard make a better case than I have just made to you for the biblical Moses? And I'm not trying to brag or toot my own horn, okay? I just want you to really consider that. For those of you who think I'm right, I'm glad you do. Welcome aboard. But for those of you who don't agree and think I'm wrong, consider the alternative. There isn't one. No one has ever presented the type of evidence that I have just presented to you today. I'm very proud of my discovery. I'm very happy. This presentation could have been better. It was better. I hate that my lines wasn't straight. That really bothers me, but I hope you're not tripping about that. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, this season finale, double 2-hour episode. God, my mother gonna let me have it. This long episode of Son of a Preacher Man. Soapman want to thank you so much for joining him and enduring him. Man, hopefully I'll see you real soon. We're going to take a break for a couple weeks, but we will be back with season 2 of Soapman. But until then, Soapman is out.